So I'm not going to bore you all with a massive PowerPoint presentation, but I thought it would be helpful to perhaps just update a little bit about some of the progress and ongoing progress in the tuberous sclerosis clinic. And only to pick up on, as Luke said, I know that we're based in Cardiff, but actually this is a Wales tuberous sclerosis clinic. So although we're sort of based in Cardiff, it's very, I really want to emphasise that we serve the whole of Wales. I'm sure some of you will be well aware of this. So the tuberous sclerosis clinic and service in Wales goes back quite a long time, and indeed many of the TSA community were really instrumental in setting that up and in supporting the research that went into some of the sort of TSC2 gene discovery. So although it's quite a long-standing clinic and there's been lots of research participation, we actually didn't have any formal funding. So it's a little bit ad hoc, and it wasn't really possible for us to really establish a very robust service. So it has been quite difficult for us to formalise exactly who our patients are, who need to access us, and when they need to access us. So those are some really key factors that were quite important to us. So I'm sure some of you be very familiar with Professor Julian Sampson, who is a big name in tuberous sclerosis. I worked with Julian for a few years before his retirement. Sadly, he has now retired. But on the plus side, from my perspective, he's handed the service over to me from a genetics perspective. So it's given us a little bit, I suppose, of an opportunity to say, what do we need to change? What perhaps do we need to formalise? And how can we improve on the service that's already in place? So big thanks to the TSA for their huge support with our application for funding. And we were granted some funding last year, which came into effect in April of this year, so still quite new. But that's really helped us to get a number of staff involved and really expand our TSC network in Wales. So I've put myself first there, slightly egotistical, but so I am a clinical geneticist. I'm very much supported in the service by Anurag Saxena, who I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. He's a paediatric neurologist, but has quite a long-standing research interest in TS, and again has been involved in the TS service for a number of years. Our sort of new contacts are Sian Griffin, who's an adult nephrologist, kidney specialist, and also Dr. Khaled Hamandi, who's an adult neurologist. We sort of felt that it'd be really helpful to have some input and some sort of breadth of knowledge, really, to support our decision making, and also to give us their own expertise. So it's been really helpful to form those links with them recently. There's also Dr. Mark Davis, he's actually an adult oncologist, but again has a long-standing interest in TS, so he does sometimes attend the clinic as well. And then I'd like to introduce Karen Bailey, who's also on the call, who has very recently started, so just last month in November, as our clinical nurse specialist. Karen is new to the TS service, but isn't new to genetics at all. So Karen we've worked together for a number of years, and she's also worked with Professor Sampson for a number of years, and in fact was our lead genetic counsellor, so very knowledgeable. So I don't know if you want to say, if you've got anything that you wanted to add, Karen.
Say hi, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to being part of the service, yeah.
So we're really happy to have appointed Karen into that post, and I think she's going to be a real asset. And clinical psychologist has very much formed part of our business case and part of our funding. That is something that's still a little bit of a work in progress, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. So again, just to sort of touch on, we're based in UHW, so we're based in the Heath Hospital in Cardiff, but we're very keen, and it's a really integral part of the TS service, that our funding, and our aim is very much to serve the whole of Wales. So we have the facility and the possibility of holding clinics at any of these locations on the map. At the moment, the majority of those do happen at UHW, but we're very keen to arrange clinics in West Wales and at some point also in North Wales. For practical purposes, it makes sense for us to try to cohort or gather a group of patients so that we can sort of make a day of it, if you like, and try to see as many patients as possible when we travel to those places. But that's something that's very important to us as well. And I suppose our plan is we hold 2 consultant clinics per month. It's possible that Karen, as she becomes more settled in the role, may hold additional clinics to that as nurse-led clinics. But at the moment, all of those clinics involve myself and Dr. Saxena. And those occur on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays of every month. And really, we accept referrals from pretty much anywhere. One of our real goals in this first year of our funding has been to try to establish who, not just who do we know about and that we need to see, but also who don't we know about and who isn't being seen and has perhaps fallen through the cracks over the years. So that's also really a real priority. So we're very happy to accept referrals from GPs, any other specialties. We would also accept self-referrals. So for example, if somebody has a diagnosis of tuberous sclerosis or a family member, if they want to get in contact with us and say, my brother, son, whoever hasn't been seen for a number of years and hasn't really been having a formal follow-up, then we'd be very happy to arrange a follow-up for them. At the moment, our referral pathway is that all of the referrals come via the genetic service, the All Wales Medical Genomic Service, or AWMGS. And really that's just because that's where our service sits at the moment. So that's where our clinic coordinators are and so forth. So it's probably the most streamlined approach to come direct to genetics with any referrals. And one of our new developments in the last 2 months has been that we've managed to set up these multidisciplinary meetings. So that includes adult neurology, adult nephrology, and enables us to have a sort of NDT approach to thinking about screening intervals and, you know, whether there's any follow-up or any additional screening that we need to do for patients. It also gives us a really good facility to sort of give a combined opinion that we can feed back to the local teams. And that's also at the moment our forum for deciding about patients being eligible for treatments such as Everlimers. So as I'm sure you're very well aware, COVID has obviously really changed the way that all services in the NHS are being delivered. And it's a little bit of a swings and roundabouts situation. The downside is that obviously sometimes it is really important and really helpful for us to see patients and their families in a face-to-face situation. Equally, sometimes from people who are geographically distant and actually don't particularly want to travel to a hospital, for example, if that sparks off a lot of anxiety or difficulties, then the ability to carry out telephone appointments or virtual appointments has been really beneficial. So at the moment, we're offering that option to everybody, really. As I say, as we do more of these, as we're sort of getting more settled in and organising more of the peripheral clinics, I hope that will offer the option for people in other geographical locations around Wales to have the option of a face-to-face appointment if that's something that they would prefer. And really the structure of our appointments is a little bit of a sort of TSMOT, if you like. So trying to take a sort of holistic view to say, right, what follow-up are you having? What follow-up aren't you having? And go through system by system to see if there's any gaps that we can help to fill or to support. But it is this sort of hub and spoke, which is very popular in NHS speak at the moment, approach. So although we would like to offer an appointment in the TS clinic to all patients with TS, we're not necessarily in a position at the moment to be able to entirely take over their care. So our sort of model of care at the moment is that we would see those patients, review the care that they're having, perhaps if we come up with any sort of a recommendation or something that we think perhaps a need that isn't being met, rather than necessarily orchestrating that ourselves, we would probably feed that back to their local specialist and almost adopt a sort of shared care model. So our plan is probably slightly different in different patient groups. So for children, a lot of children do have very good follow-up that's coordinated by their community paediatricians. So I suppose we don't want people to feel obligated or pressured that they have to also attend a tuberous sclerosis specialist clinic. And indeed, we're increasingly forming good links with paediatricians in different areas of Wales who can sort of perhaps not check in with us, but perhaps just sort of collaborate with us to do a sort of joined up approach to those children's care. Equally, I think we'd always be happy that we do have some families who say that for various reasons they would like to attend a specialist tuberous sclerosis appointment, whether that's every year, every 5 years, or whatever. So certainly we would be happy to accommodate that if desired. I suppose for adults, in the absence of the equivalent of a community paediatrician, sometimes that can be a little bit more challenging, in the sense that the coordination of care and investigations can be more difficult. So I think our aim is that we would like to offer follow-up appointments 2 yearly to most of our adult patients, unless obviously people would prefer not to engage in that service. And then we have had a number of prenatal or pregnant patients who've approached us. We do offer a service where, again, we do see them in the tuberous sclerosis clinic, but because of the time pressures of that situation, we try to expedite those appointments. So sort of do a sort of baseline check-in to see where they're up to and whether there's any considerations for things like prenatal testing or prenatal investigations like heart scans or echoes or whatnot. And then at the moment, we're trying to see them all in late pregnancy so that we can make a plan around the delivery and make all of the necessary follow-up arrangements, and then offer all of those babies a review at sort of 3 to 6 months. Again, if they're having all of the care that they feel is necessary in their locality, there's certainly not an obligation for them to engage in that, but it's just to offer them that option. So I wanted to touch on a few key things which are obviously quite important in TS, particularly to us in Wales at the moment. So Everlimers. When Everlimers was first introduced as part of the sort of coming off the research and the EXIST trials and so forth, initially the prescribing of that was mainly being done from the Tuberous Sclerosis Clinic by Dr. Saxena. Now, when we sort of took a step back and thought about how best to approach that, we had some concerns about whether that was the best approach on a few levels, really. So we in genetics don't have any out of hours cover. So for those who are familiar with Everlimers, if somebody were to become unwell out of hours or at the weekend or so on, we felt that actually it's really important to have a point of contact so that that team that was looking after them in that acute setting could actually get specialist advice. So we actually felt that on the looking at it overall, really, particularly given that I'm from a paediatric background, as is Dr. Saxena, it was probably important for somebody who was in a position to be able to sort of manage all of the aftercare and the monitoring and things around that in a more robust way. So over the last year, we've been moving the prescribing of the Everlimers out of the Tuberous Sclerosis Clinic, and that's mainly been to the specialist for the system that it's mainly indicated. So for example, for patients who are on that medication for kidney problems, we've mainly tried to hand that over to local kidney specialists. And equally for patients who are on that for neurological reasons, we've been in liaison with neurologists about how best to take that forwards. And obviously there's been some really good news this year in that the Welsh Health Specialist Services Commissioning Group, or WISC, have granted us funding for Everlimers for refractory epilepsy, which has been really good news. I hate to sound really negative and sort of put a sort of fly in the ointment. I should say that the commissioning covers the drug cost. So what we haven't got at the moment is a sort of pathway and a structure around that as to who is going to prescribe that, and at what stage do we hand that prescribing duty over. So although from a funding perspective, that's really good news, in all reality, we're certainly not in a position at the moment where we could be handing out prescriptions tomorrow. There's still going to be a little bit of a lead into that, which I imagine is going to be sort of at least a couple of months really before we get all of those processes ironed out. Now, on a sort of slightly more negative stroke frustrating note, you may well be aware that there's been a very long-standing clinical indication for Everlimers for subependymal giant cell astrocytomas, or SAGA, and also the renal angiomyolipomas, or the TS-associated growths. Now, we had been prescribing that without any problem. Unfortunately, in retrospect, it seems that there was a sort of temporary commissioning agreement between Novartis, who are the drug company that make that drug, and the Welsh government. Now, unfortunately, through a lot of digging about what exactly the problem is, the commissioning process in Wales for WISC seems to be different to that in the NHS, NHSE or NHS England. The key difference being that that WISC won't commission a drug without having an economic evaluation showing that it is the most cost-effective treatment. Now, when we've gone back to Novartis asking them if they could put that document together for us, unfortunately, they've come back to us saying that they don't have anybody in place that will do that, and therefore that's not something that they're willing to do at this time. Therefore, we're at a little bit of a standoff when it comes to the commissioning of Everlimers for SAGA and renal AMLs. Now, we do have agreement from WISC that for patients who are already on the treatment, that's not going to be a problem. The obstacle seems to be the patients that we're identifying through these sort of more regular clinics that actually we think should be candidates for Everlimers on this basis. Now, Everlimers is due to come off patent, meaning it's going to get a lot cheaper in September next year. So what we need at the moment, and what we've been trying to figure out, is a holding measure, if you like, that can get us access to this drug for patients that need it in a timely manner. And at the moment, the best sort of workaround for that seems to be an independent patient funding request. So that's a sort of 25-page document that we fill out, including evidence and so on and so forth. And we submit it for each new patient that would require this treatment, and WISC tell us whether or not they're going to grant that funding. Now, as a very sort of off the record indication, they've indicated to us that they certainly wouldn't turn down any of these IPFRs. Therefore, what we've done at the moment is sort of do a generic IPFR, and we're hoping that we can basically just resubmit that time and time again for each patient that we need it for, and that it won't be turned down. At the moment, touch wood, we don't have any indication to say that that approach isn't going to work, but unfortunately, there's no getting around it. It has taken us a while to get to this point to say, right, this is the only way that we're going to fudge this until September. So there's going to be a little bit of waiting to see what comes of that. as I say, all of the feedback that we're getting is that that's going to be an acceptable approach, and that they will, you know, they'll go with that. If that's not the case, I think we will have to sort of think again and think about perhaps, you know, getting a little bit more animated in our protest, because we're certainly not willing to let this slide until September. And that, you know, I would want to reassure you all that that's not something that we would be willing to see happen. And then the other thing is the Epidiolex, the CBD oil. So again, this is currently going through the review process. It was discussed in the New Medicines Group meeting last month. That's a private meeting, so they don't give us any public announcement as to what the outcome was. But again, sort of, you know, nods in all the right places, seems to be that it's quite optimistic about that being approved. But because of the need to get the commissioning and the funding for that, I think we're likely to be looking at around 4 to 5 months before that actually does become a reality in Wales. And it's very similar, actually. In fact, the CBD oil is more straightforward in some regards, in that the monitoring and the prescribing is much less onerous than it is for the Everlimers. But I suppose what we're trying to do is that as we're developing these pathways for the Everlimers, particularly for the refractory epilepsy, almost trying to do both at the same time. So trying to probably do a pathway that would work for both, so that we can minimise that delay once hopefully we do get the final approval to introduce that medication. So in summary, and sort of our aims at the moment, definitely you know, our service is still very young, it's still a work in progress. We do have to feed back on everything that we've been doing to WISC. I think at some stage we may need to review our funding, and as to whether or not we need to ask for a little bit more money. In Wales, we're lucky to have quite a big patient group with tuberous sclerosis, which is really positive in many ways, but does mean obviously that there's an associated amount of time and follow-up and care that's required. One of our other really key goals is to implement new computer systems. We're really keen to try and join up the way that we are communicating with patients in the tuberous sclerosis clinic and the MDT, and how their local specialists are being updated and are able to sort of keep up with those discussions that we are having. So that's one of the other things we're working on. Planning pathways for prescribing. As I say, that's a really key priority. And one of the other things is North Wales at the moment. So we are aware that some of our Welsh patients are being seen in Liverpool. Some of them haven't been seen for a number of years. So it's just clarifying, I suppose, the best place for us to organise their care and how best to support them. Starting our peripheral clinics is also a real priority. And also, I think, the psychology support is going to be really, really helpful. And just this week we've had an update, so we hope that we're making some progress with that at last. There seem to be, again, positive indications that may be possible within the next few months. So, there I am. That's me and Karen. Also Dr. Saxena. So I would say that we probably form this sort of core group of primary contacts for the service. That's our telephone number. We have a shared secretary, and that's also an email address. So at the moment, we do still prefer referrals to come in via letter. But, you know, if there are specialists or anybody else who wants to contact us for information, then that's certainly something that we're very happy to accommodate. So that's all I wanted to say from my perspective, really. I don't know if there were any questions or.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. Yeah, if there are any questions, please just give a wave or any way you can, or feel free to write them down in the chat box otherwise. But it's it's so encouraging to see how everything is carrying on, and really, really excellent for the Welsh community as a whole, that the clinic will be sort of thinking, and you always have in terms of everything, but thinking beyond Cardiff as well in terms of going to the different centres throughout Wales. That's excellent to know. That's certainly something that we will keep in mind should we ever get any new diagnosis. Individuals or families or whatnot contacting us on the support line. That's great. So if there are any questions, now's your time. I'm going to mute for a second. Oh, Marie, there you go. Marie, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Jenny, for that overview of the clinic. Delighted that we've had funding for the clinic to continue, and for the good work in Wales because of the research base, the long-standing research base in Wales, and it's lovely to see that work coming from the lab to the living room, as it were, for us to have treatments and to have access to care locally. I was just going to ask if for people who will be following the self-referral route, do you plan to have any referral forms so that the process is easier?
So I suppose what we tend to do, and I should say this is quite a special situation for TS. So generally, it isn't a sort of done thing that people phone up and self-refer. That's completely acceptable if they're part of a known family. But what I would say is that the more people we're contacting that haven't been seen for a number of years, the more people are saying, well, I haven't seen anybody, I haven't had a scan for 5-10 years. So actually, from my perspective, I would be perfectly happy for them to, phone up, say, I've got a diagnosis of tuberous sclerosis. I'd like to arrange to be seen in a clinic appointment. And then what we tend to do in genetics is we do a sort of, not necessarily a formal pre-clinic situation, but potentially those would be people that then perhaps Karen would make contact with, get a little bit of background, confirm the diagnosis and things. But I think we're very aware that there are quite a number of patients in Wales who probably aren't accessing this service. So I'd be quite keen to sort of minimise the barriers, if you like. So to be honest, a sort of small referral letter from their GP saying, they've got tuberous sclerosis, please see them, to me, doesn't make a vast amount of difference to them just phoning up and saying, I've got tuberous sclerosis. I may get shot for that on the fact that we may be that we're supposed to have formal referrals, but certainly I'd be very happy for people to contact us and to say, and like I say, the different types of appointments, obviously in some senses are really good for us from a sense of convenience, but also I hope that it's sort of reducing some of the barriers to people who are in different communities, because actually for a lot of people with GS, if they've got a confirmed diagnosis, and a lot of what we need to talk to them about and what they're concerned about, we actually can do without them needing to traipse all the way to Cardiff, or even traipse all the way to sort of Haverfordwest or Wrexham or wherever else. So I hope that will make it easier for people to access the service, really.
Yes, reducing barriers to accessibility, really, really important, isn't it? I
Yeah.
was also going to ask, with the new funding, does that include the ability to have scannings and MRIs done at the Heath, or will that still be done to local services?
So at the moment, and I've got to be completely honest with you, Maria, it's because nobody's picked us up on it. So at the moment, what we do is we see the patients in Cardiff or wherever. So as the genetics service and as a tuberous sclerosis service, we are technically an all Wales service. Therefore, I at the moment request the scans locally. So if for some reason that isn't possible, or there isn't a list there, then obviously we can think about bringing them to Cardiff. But actually the waiting lists in Cardiff is much worse than they are in many of the peripheral hospitals. So yes, our aim would very much be to deliver as much care as possible in the local hospital. And I think my argument would be if sort of local hospitals came back and said, well, this is an additional workload. I don't know that it is really an additional workload, because that person's been there the whole time. They do still live in that place, and therefore they are a patient of that hospital. So I think we could probably argue that one. So yes, that would be our intention.
Another question, if you don't mind. Has the nephrologist actually started with the clinics?
She has. So as of, we had our first NDT last week, actually. So yes, so it's a little bit of sort of, obviously us all getting used to each other and getting to grips with things. Our sort of model at the moment, and we're still trying to iron out these pathways, but our model at the moment is that we have Sian Griffin, who's our sort of specialist based in Cardiff and who takes part in the NDT. But actually then we are identifying these little sort of, I don't quite know what the right word is, affiliates or friends of the clinic, if you like, in different areas. So Andy Williams was really helpful as a nephrologist based in Swansea. Sadly, he's retired now. So there's another 3 nephrologists who have come into post and are sort of sharing out those patients that were under Andy Williams. So they're being really helpful in helping us with supporting those local patients. And we've also then identified a willing nephrologist in North Wales who's been very helpful in supporting patients and starting Everlimers and so on. So I suppose while Sian is our named specialist, it's certainly a bit of I think it's more of a network really in terms of practical senses. And what we're in the process of doing at the moment is, because with the refractory epilepsy and the Everlimers, we almost need to do the same thing with neurology and find our affiliates in each health board who can take on that responsibility. So that's a work in progress as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Some great questions there. And yeah, it's something that we always actually asking ourselves, Jennifer, is regarding referrals and what's the clearest, best way. So that's good to know for our learning as well. So that's excellent. Are there any more questions from anyone? You do feel free to put anything in the chat as well if you prefer to write anything.
I was just going to ask one, if that's okay. So I was just going to ask Jennifer, when you say that, so you put the email address up on screen, I was just wondering if you kind of are happy for people in the TSC community to get in touch if they have any problems, if they're seen at the Cardiff Clinic, for them to contact the clinic that way, to get in touch by the email, just because obviously then if we get anyone contacting us on the support line who are trying to get in touch with you for any reason, we could pass on the email address. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. What I would say is, so that's kind of a generic email address, that's for the genetic service. I think what Karen and I would probably say is, it's because that email doesn't come directly to us. And a very important point that I should have mentioned, sorry, Karen only works, we've only got Karen for 2 days a week. So there isn't somebody there every day. So it's not always the case that you'll get an immediate response. But yeah, I think what we would ask our sort of the people who man that email address is just to forward anything TS related onto myself or Karen, or myself and Karen. So it would be really helpful if perhaps even in the title of the email, if somebody is contacting, going to that email address for that purpose, just to make clear that it's a TS related query, because then it's more likely to get to the right place.
Great, thank you.
Right, yeah, that's handy for us to know. Okay, any final, oh, go on, Marie, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I was giving everybody else a chance. Regarding the digital technology and looking at a system where everybody can feed into, are you looking at the chai community at all, Jenny? There's
sorry.
I was just going to explain a little bit about the chai. That I think, no, you missed. I think you missed the meeting with the where that was being presented a while ago. It seems to be quite a good system where clinicians can feed into the system and also patients as well, but it's a patient-owned system so that the data protection issues don't come into it at all.
Oh, okay. Is that sort of, I've never heard of it. Is that chai as in sort of chai?
C-H-A-I, and it's chai community.
Oh, okay. I'll have a little look at that.
Brilliant.
It is, so one of the many barriers is that in genetics, we work on a different system to neurology and nephrology. So what we hear time and time again is that basically somebody's been seen by nephrology and they don't know what we've said to them. And so I think it's trying to get a bit more of a joined up approach, really, so that we're all on the same page. So this system that had been mentioned to us was this system that neurosciences in Cardiff and Vale use at the moment. But yeah, that would certainly be, I think we're very open to ideas. So we'd certainly be, I'd certainly have a look at that.
I believe some health boards have already taken on the system for some conditions. But it was mentioned at the Rare Disease Implementation Group a few months ago, and there was a presentation.
Oh, okay.
So that seemed quite interesting and promising for the rare disease community as a whole then.
Also, Marie, from a sort of, obviously, always trying to argue the case side, so do you know, did they mention which health boards it had been used in? Because that would give us a bit of
Yes, Prof Keir Lewis has been involved, so Hywel Dda is one of them. And I think Betsy Cadwaladr as well.
Okay. That's like, if we've got precedent, that always gives us a but yeah, that's something that we're really, you know, we're really keen on. Because I think it would just make appointments much more useful for patients, and so that you're not sort of explaining the last 6 months events every time, sort of thing, is the aim.
What would seem to be a huge benefit of the CHAI community system is that because it's patient owned, because the data protection then issues don't come into it, and clinicians are able to feed into the system, and patients as well can upload their care plans, and it's more of a holistic view of a patient's needs rather than just clinically led things.
Yeah, no, you know, that sounds really interesting. As I say, I'm ashamed to say I've never heard of it, to be honest, but we'll certainly have a look. That sounds really good.
Thank you. And the final thing from me, what can TSC community do to support in getting the commissioning right for Everlimers for the SEGA and the kidney issues, so that the IPFR doesn't need to be used?
It's such a frustrating situation, but what I would say is I would hold, so if they are true to their word, so I put my first one in yesterday. If they're true to their word and that gets approved in a timely fashion, I'm okay with that because we're looking at a similar timeline. So what we do is put it through as a semi-urgent one, so it doesn't wait for, so whisk meetings are quarterly, which obviously what I don't want to happen is for them all to have to wait till a whisk meeting. So as long as that's fine, then I think that's okay as an interim measure. If that doesn't go smoothly, then I think we may need to call on you to once again, you know, put some political pressure, some sort of pressure on the AMs, the MPs, all the rest of it again, because it's you know, it's ridiculous that they've given us, it's really good news that we've got the commission in for the epilepsy, but actually talk about giving with one hand and taking with the other. So that's really, you know, it's really, really frustrating. So if this works as a workaround, I think that's okay. If not, then I think we may have to go sort of all guns blazing again a bit.
I am aware that some patients under NHS England have been prescribed the generic version already.
So I don't know about the, we are at the moment very much sticking with the Vitubia, the Everlimers, as per the trials. I think the argument is that the generic version is obviously significantly cheaper. What I would say is that I would be more inclined to go down that route if we were looking at 5 years before it comes off patent. I think given that we are only looking until September next year, I think clinically there probably isn't a great deal of, clinically, I'm sure for people who are receiving the generic one, there are no concerns at all, and I'd be very reassuring about that. However, I think from a Wales point of view, if we just stick to the sort of line of, we want the Everlimers, that's the one that was used in the trial, where it's going to drop in price massively in September next year. So it's just quite a short period, because otherwise, obviously, then if you start on the generic one, it's very unlikely that you're likely to continue on that one. So I think the evidence base is Everlimers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marie. And just so everyone knows as well, if the generic IPFRs unfortunately don't start working, fingers crossed they do, and it's absolutely fine. But the TSA will be here as well to assist with everything. So getting the community together, getting everyone engaged, that's exactly what we're here for. And you will be most likely continuing to hear on that theme more broadly. Actually, we have had quite a lot in the past, including in Wales with Everlimers, but then also moving forward, we'll hopefully hear around kind of CBD oil, and then various treatments after that, because the pipeline does look very promising at the moment. But we'll obviously keep everyone in the loop on that. Are there any final comments or questions? I'll mute just in case there is. No, looking good. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you everyone once again for coming. It's been really, really great. We get so much from these events, in particular the clinic updates, which I think we get a real good insight into the workings and what's happening and whatnot. It's really good, so thank you. If you do want to re-watch the recording, we will be sharing it again, or if there's anyone who you know who would be interested, do please share it across them. It'll probably be the end of this week, if not next week. We'll see. We do have a number of events that we've recently shared as well. We had the LAM event most recently, which was very interesting. And yeah, keep an eye out on what we do. We'll obviously keep you all in the loop. But other than that, if I don't hear from anyone or see anyone virtually, do hope you have a lovely Christmas, and hopefully very, very optimistic and healthy New Year as well. So thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.